So good morning. But before I begin, I just have to say the song he was singing, I think it was about a year or 2 years ago. We kind of had a contest. We were going to do a fundraiser, and we had a contest for people to design a shirt. Do you all remember that? And the shirt that we finally agreed on was a lotus blossom in the middle, and the saying was, "Love is my religion." And I've been wearing that. I don't have it on today, but I was wearing it like 3 days last week, and I got a lot of comments. My wifey designed that shirt, by the way. Anyway, hello, my name is Dr. Ron Fox, and welcome to the Sunday service for the Center for Spiritual Living, Space Coast. This would be a really good time to turn off any cell phones if you're here. And this morning, any first-time guests, anybody that's never been to a Center for Spiritual Living that's here today or going to watch during the week, we believe there's one God, many paths to that God, and we're here to love, honor, and support you no matter what your divine path is. And the Center for Spiritual Living Space Coast is a safe haven for people of all beliefs and lifestyles, whoever you are and wherever you find yourself on your journey of faith. You're welcome here. Our practitioner today is Ginny Panic, and our reader is Carol Gabika. So just a few announcements. Our Tuesday book discussion group is almost at the end, We're doing the 4 agreements. And so we did have, we're looking for recommendations, let me say, for our next book. And we do have 4 so far, which I'll tell you: The Celestine Prophecy by James Redfield, The Eye of the Storm by Gary Simmons, Real Moments by Barbara DeAngelis, and Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. But if anybody, even if you don't go to the book group, if you've read a really good book lately and you want to recommend it, just get in touch with me and I'll run it by the group. Next Saturday morning, August 6th, 10 o'clock in this room is our Socrates Circle. So if you're interested, we met a couple of weeks ago and it was we really had a really interesting discussion, and we went around, we thought we wouldn't on the question, we went around like 4 or 5 times. So please consider coming. Next Sunday is our board meeting, and we're going to do something a little different to begin the board meeting. Our practitioner, Patrice Rivera, is going to lead anybody that comes, the board, and you're all welcome, in visioning. Visioning is a spiritual practice where we try to find God's idea for a project, for anything that we're doing. We can do it in a group, we could do it individually, and Patrice is going to lead us and show us how to use that. So if you're interested, everybody's welcome to come to the board meeting. But if you just want to come to the visioning, that's fine. Did I cover it well enough? Okay. That's it. That's all the announcements. So we'll do another song and then we'll turn it over to Ginny.
So let us take this moment to come together in this sacred space of now. As we feel the chair about us, we know we are supported, but let us know that we are supported in all ways, always. So I believe that there is only one source, only one God, only one power, and it lives within me. It moves through me. It animates me. It moves me forward in greater and greater ways. And what I know for myself, I know for each one, that God is everywhere present. It is in nature. It is in the air we breathe. It is the bird on the wing. It is the fish in the sea. It is the person that knocks on my door and asks for help. God is everywhere, and it is the greatest teacher. And it brings me into this understanding that I am connected to everything, and everything is connected to me. And it is a good and grateful feeling that I have this morning to be a part of this center for Spiritual Living Space Coast to know that Reverend Dr. Ron Fox will be giving us a talk that will open our hearts and our minds to a greater way of living, to a greater way of understanding this one power, this one source, this one all that is, that only desires to give, to give. And so we receive this and give in our own lives. And I am grateful for everyone that is a part of this service today and anyone that is watching later. And I know that we are all touched in our deepest part of our hearts as we see the living God within each one. And so this morning, I just released this treatment into the great I am, because the great I am always says yes. And so I ask that you please say with me, and so it is.
Thank you, Jen. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
I stand on the shoulders of giants, but so consumed with my trivial haves and have-nots, I am unaware of their combined strength, the combined strength that propels me forward and clears my path. The men and women, known and unknown to me, whose efforts and determination allow me to be a self-proclaimed individual, charging through fear and chagrin, insecurities and overconfidence, stumbling but never falling, because their invisible hands steady my course. What unseen power protects my steps, leads me to succeed and fail, but step nonetheless. Standing on the shoulders of all who have come before, who bore the strife and celebrated the victories that allow me to push forward, mighty giants holding my hand, balancing my forward movement, drying my tears and resounding with laughter at my antics. A quiet thank you in a second of realization before I once more melt into my unknowing bliss of survival.
I am always blown away by Carol's writing. Thank you so much. Wow. So good morning again. And the title for the message today is Teachers in Disguise. And I want to tell you how I came up with the title and how I did. I saw a quote by Kahlil Gibran, and I've seen it many times before, but it struck me when I saw it last week. And here's the quote. I've learned silence from the talkative, toleration from the intolerant, kindness from the unkind, yet strange, I am ungrateful to these teachers. So I want to give you an example of what I mean by teachers in disguise. So Rachel Remen is a doctor, and she does counseling with people that are more or less at the end of life, and or at least ill. And so she writes in her book, Kitchen Table Wisdom, that she was counseling with a man who had cancer. And he knew that Rachel liked stories. So he came in one day and he said, let me tell you about a story I just read. And it's about Shiva and Shakti, the divine couple in Hinduism. And they're looking over the earth. And Shakti sees a poor man walking down the street. I guess he would be the equivalent of what we might consider a homeless person today. But his clothes were ragged, his sandals were kind of ripped, and he just looked really sad. And it got to Shakti, it touched her heart. And so she turns to Shiva and she says, why don't you drop a bag of gold on his path? And he says, I can't. And she says, what do you mean you can't? You're God. Why can't you? And she gets, and he says, because he's not ready for it. And she gets really angry at him. And after anger's not working, she pleads. And so being a good husband, he drops the bag of gold. Now here's what the fellow is thinking as he's walking along his path. He's thinking to himself, wow, I wonder where I'll get my meal tonight, or will I go hungry? And as he's thinking that, he turns around a corner and he sees something in his path. And he says to himself, wow, look at that big rock in my path. Good thing I saw it. If I hit it, I could have ripped my sandals even more. And he turns and he walks around it and goes on his path. And Rachel Remen says, life very often drops a package of gold in our path, but very often it doesn't seem like what it is. And so she turns, after this fellow tells her this story, she turns to him and she says, tell me, has life ever dropped a bag of gold on your path? And he says, why, Rachel, I thought you would have guessed. It's the cancer. That's a teacher in disguise. That's what I want to speak about today. So Donna Markova is also a spiritual writer, and she's a counselor. And in one of her books, she says when she's counseling somebody, one of the questions she often asks them is, what is your favorite scar? And when they answer, she says, so what message or lesson did you learn from the scar? And she says, often that's a turning point in somebody's life. And so I was thinking, just imagine if the darkest moments in our life are what lets the light in. So I want to share, we develop courage. We develop courage by having difficult moments. So I want to give you a couple of quotes that bring the point home. And the first one is from, of all people, Mary Tyler Moore, who in her life had difficulties. You know, she had diabetes, and she had a son who committed suicide, which I think they even did a movie about. And she wrote, you can't be brave if you've only had wonderful things happen to you. And Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, he wrote, the dark night of the soul comes just before revelation, when everything is lost and all seems darkness, then comes the new light and all that is needed. And when I read that, I thought, you know, obviously I agree with it, or I wouldn't have quoted it, but I think he's also implicitly saying is we get all that's needed if we work through the dark night, not if we try to avoid it by, you know, whatever, alcohol, drugs, sex, whatever, that when we face it, when we have the courage to walk through it, the universe provides us with all we need. Because very often in our life, pain is our best teacher. So I want to look at this from a different perspective. So we all have, I'm sure, difficult people in our life. You know, they can make us angry, they can sap our energy. We do whatever we can to avoid them, probably, you know. And the truth is, when we think in terms of right and wrong, what that means is we're automatically making somebody wrong. And when we make somebody wrong, that creates separation. And so really, no matter how arrogant somebody is, no matter how disrespectful somebody is, we don't have to answer in kind. We don't have to follow what they did. And I actually hadn't planned on speaking about this, but the more I thought about it, Becky and I were in a doctor. I want to give you an example of what I mean by responding in kind. Becky and I were in a doctor's office this week, and one of the other patients, the doctor's office closes from noon to 1. We just happened to be there, and the phone rang, and the person that was answering the phone put it on speaker so I could hear. And it was a patient who had a 12:20 appointment, but the downstairs door was locked. And when she asked the person who answered the phone, when are you going to open up the door? She did it with a real attitude. And the person opened the door. When she came up, they got into a discussion about when the lady's appointment was, because they didn't have her appointment on the calendar. And this lady really raised the level of the conversation. And when I speak about responding in kind, the doctor's person responded in kind. And Becky and I are sitting there, and out of nowhere, they're yelling at one another. This patient is yelling. The doctor's person is yelling. They're interrupting one another. And somebody else, I guess they were eating lunch from the doctor's office, came out and said, "My God, I've got the door closed and I can hear you guys. What is going on?" And the point I'm trying to make is, we don't have to do that. And I've spoken about this before, because when I read this, it really clicked with me. And I'm going to talk about this more later on, but we can stop and we can ask ourselves, who do I choose to be in this moment? Who do I choose to be in this moment? That doctor's person could have responded in a different way that wouldn't have escalated the conflict. Or I don't think this is an exact quote, but the Course in Miracles says, I could choose peace instead of this. So I want to tell you a story, and Ginny will resonate with this, I know. When Becky and I got here, and I've talked about the first part of what I'm going to tell you, but I never really finished it before. When Becky and I got here, Ginny had book groups. There was a lady in the book group that drove me totally crazy. She would talk all the time, and it wasn't just that she was talking, she would repeat it. So she would say something, repeat it, say it again, and repeat it 3 and 4 times. And it would just drive me crazy. And the reason I talked about it before is when I would go home and say to Becky, "Oh my God, she's driving me crazy," I wouldn't get any sympathy from my wife. What she would say is, "What is she trying to teach you?" Which is everything I didn't want to hear. But I want to tell you the rest of it, because I've really never finished the rest of it. So I really listened to Becky, and I started to think, one of the ways I could find out what she was trying to teach me is to get to know her better. And so I called her and we talked, and she had lots of stuff going on in her life that was really painful for her. And so the way she talked about it was annoying to me. And I know it was annoying to other people too. But when I got to know her, she was a really kind and gentle and generous person. And I was able to see more than this lady that was annoying me. And in fact, we got to be close enough that one year for Christmas, she gave Becky and I a really beautiful Christmas gift that we still have and that we still use every single Christmas. And it really, I mean, I spoke to her more than once, but it really took one person saying, what are you going to learn from her? And one phone call that started it, that taught me a whole new lesson. Joel Goldsmith, was a spiritual writer, said, you know, that God and man are one, and that there's no way you can love God without some of that love flowing out to your neighbor. And he said, you know, when you don't do others what you'd like done unto you, it doesn't hurt them, it hurts you. And he said, in the short run, it might hurt somebody else. But in the long run, in the end, it does injury to ourselves. And I thought about that this week. And you know what he's saying is, in the long run, the reason it's hurting us, who's carrying the burden? Who's walking around pissed off at somebody or your neighbor or whatever? Who's angry? Who's enraged? Who's upset? You are. Chances are they have no idea what's going on in you, and they're living their life, going on their own merry way. And you're the one that's suffering. And Eric Butterworth, the great Unity minister, kind of says the same thing. He says, you know, getting along with other people isn't about what they say and do. It's about how you react. And so he asks a question, which I thought was really interesting. He says, can you love somebody you don't even like? Think about it. Can you love somebody you don't even like? And he said, you don't love because you're loved, or only if you're loved. He said, you love because God loved you first. And that love is within you. Gary Simmons, who's also a Unity minister and wrote the book, The Eye of the Storm, he discusses that point too. And he said, to be considered a child of God, you have to love who it's difficult to love. To be considered a child of God, you have to love who's difficult to love. Why? Why does he write that? Because that's how God loves. God loves, or the sun rises on the good and the evil. It rains on the just and the unjust. And he said, we need to treat our enemy like we would treat a beloved friend. And the truth is, when we do that, we don't have an enemy anymore. And I'm not standing up here saying it's easy. I fall into it. Everybody falls into it, but it's something to aim for. And Ernest Holmes, the founder of the Centers for Spiritual Living, wrote, when we realize that God and man are one and not two, we love both. So this is a test. What is one word that stops us from doing that? What is one word that stops us from loving our enemies like we love our friends? From not anybody? Fear. Those are all good, but it's not the one I want. Anybody? Did you say ego? No. Anybody else? All right. The one I picked is judgment. Okay. We judge. So I want to give you two examples of judgment. The first one is in my life, And the second one is my wife's in my life. And actually, Becky asked me not to, years ago, she said, don't talk about that one anymore because it hurts me so much what we did, but it's been a long time. So I'm sure it'll be okay. And if it's not, I'll hear when we go home. Years ago, when Becky and I lived in San Clemente, California, I wrote a talk titled, Everything I Learned from the Car Wash. So I want to tell you what I meant. And remember now, we're talking about judgment. So I went to this car wash in San Clemente, and I used to have my own business that did really well. So I had a Mercedes, which I always had wanted, which parenthetically turned out to be a lemon. Anyway, I go to this car wash, and in this particular car wash, it was all young people. I'll talk about that more later. Young men and young women that raced and did stuff. You know, they got your car out, they dried it, they did all the polish, the wheels. And I go in there one day, and there's a really old guy. And I hate to really describe him because it's me. He had really gray hair. He had a gray beard. And I looked at him and I thought, damn, I hope he doesn't get my car. Guess what? And he takes forever to dry it and to polish it. And at some point, I realize this guy is doing a fabulous job. He's taking a lot of time, but he's doing a fabulous job. And my friend Jenna is going to be surprised at this, but I used to carry money in my wallet. She knows me. I don't carry money in my wallet. I use my debit card. I don't remember how much money I had, but it was at least $20 or $25. And I walked up to him and I said, thank you. You did a fabulous job. I really appreciate what you did. And he beamed and he said, thank you so much. It's such a nice looking car. I want you to really do a great job. And I gave him everything I had in my wallet, partially for him and partially for my own lesson. So you would think that a normal person would learn, right? Not me. I don't know if it was the next time I went to the car wash or a couple of times later. I walk in. Now, everybody that worked in this car wash, I said before, were young men and some women, and they were all Mexican. And they worked really hard. I mean, it was a difficult job. And I go in one day, and it's the same kind of people, except there's one white kid. And I remember so distinctly, I said, please, God, not him. I have one of them at home, and I know how lazy he is. Of course, who do I get? He drives my car out, and then he disappears. He's gone, which to me seemed like forever. And for one thing, it's a Saturday morning, and I don't want to spend my morning in the car wash. And another thing, if you leave the car dry, the bubbles form like stains, and now I'm going to have a blue car with measles. So I am getting really upset. And I don't say anything. However, in my entire life, I probably have had 10 or 15 people say to me, Ron, don't ever play poker because your face gives away everything. And so I must have looked really angry. And he comes over to me and he said, is that your car? And I said, yes. And he said, well, I know it seems like it's there for a long time, but that's a really pretty car. And we just washed a whole new load of rags and they're in the dryer and I'm waiting for them to come out so I could have clean rags to dry your car. Now I feel this big. And to make it worse, he says, and don't worry if it dries and you got spots on it, I'll take it through the wash again for you. You know, what a lesson to learn in just seeing somebody and judging. And I want to do one more because it was a real lesson that Becky and I learned, and she's a lot more saintly than I am. So our wedding anniversary is December 22nd. And we were living in Southern California. And I made a reservation. It was around that time, okay, in a really upscale restaurant in Irvine, California. We get there and the place is mobbed. And they have a hostess, and the hostess says, "Why don't you have a seat?" Now, the hostess is a young woman. She's got on, isn't it really weird? It's probably 25 years ago how I remember this. She's got on a really tight black skirt, and she's got a red blouse on that doesn't quite come to the skirt. And so she's spending, every time somebody comes in, she's pulling the skirt up and the blouse down, and she looks really uncomfortable. And the two spiritual people are sitting there laughing, kind of, "Oh, look at her. Doesn't she look awkward?" And I remember saying to Becky, "Jesus, you know, if she knew this is what she was going to be doing, why would she wear an outfit that made her so uncomfortable?" And I was thinking about it this week, and I thought the best way to describe what we did is two kindergarten kids, okay? And then she comes up to us and she said, "Mr. and Mrs. Fox, I know this is a really important evening for you because I took the reservation. We've got a really big party upstairs. Everybody is busy, and I'm holding you guys out because I want to get you a really special table. So why don't you go to the bar and have a glass of wine?" So we never say no to a glass of wine. So we go to the bar, and it still takes time. She finally, we have 2 glasses of wine. She comes over and she says, "I got a really great table for you. And don't worry about the wine. It's on me." She gives us this really nice secluded table. She comes over twice to make sure we're having a good time. And I think, I don't remember exactly, she comes over to us near the end of the meal and she says, "Get dessert, it's on me too." And we look at each other and think, we were making fun of her. And this girl had a heart this big to care for us, you know? It's the kind of thing you don't need to judge. You really don't, you know? Judgment gets more judgment, and love gets more love. Eric Butterworth wrote, "If I knew you and you knew me, we would love one another regardless of who I am or who you are." You can't hate and love somebody that you get to know. And, you know, so what do we learn? I just want to talk about a couple of things we learned from difficult times. And the first thing is we learn that we can't control every event in our life, but we can control how we respond. And notice, I didn't say how we react, because when we respond, we're coming from a place of centeredness and choice. We're not immediately reacting in anger or pain, you know? And again, it's, I'm sorry to keep saying this, who do I choose to be in this moment? Who do I choose to be in this moment? And the second thing that we could learn is to look for the good in the other person. You know, none of us is perfect, and we all make mistakes. And I know this is going to sound funny, but think about it, because it's really true. Nobody gets out of bed in the morning, stretches, and says, "Wow, how can I be a jerk today?" I know it's funny, but nobody's right. Nobody says that. We're all doing the best that we can. and judging another person defines them. I mean, it's the exact opposite of what I wanted to say. Judging another person defines you. It doesn't define them. And so I want to close with a quote from Mary Morrissey, who said, "Love knows no boundaries. In opening your heart to those you find difficult, you open yourself to a love that emerges in no other way." God bless you. Thank you for being here, and have a wonderful week.